Um, I was here in Philadelphia in November, October, November, and I was at, I believe it was a rock club. Um, and if anyone was there that night, then I apologize. I'm going to repeat myself just a little, but just a little. Um, I thought I'd begin with I've been doing a lot of writing for Esquire, and they asked me several years ago. They did a brothers issue, and they asked me if I would exploit my own brother, and so I did. And the story is called "You Can't Kill the Rooster." When I was young, my father was transferred, and our family moved from western New York State to Raleigh, North Carolina. IBM had relocated a great many Northerners, and together we made relentless fun of our new neighbors and their pokey, backward way of life. Rumors circulated that the locals ran stills out of their tool sheds and referred to their house cats as good eatin'. Our parents discouraged us from using the titles ma'am or sir when addressing a teacher or a shopkeeper. Tobacco was acceptable in the form of a cigarette, but should any of us experiment with plug or snuff, we would automatically be disinherited. Mountain Dew was forbidden, and our speech was monitored for the slightest hint of a Raleigh accent. Use the word y'all, and before you knew it, you'd find yourself in a haystack, French kissing an underaged goat. Along with grits and hush puppies, the abbreviated form of you all was a dangerous step on an insidious path leading straight to the doors of the Baptist church. We might not have been the wealthiest people in town, but at least we weren't one of them. Our family remained free from outside influence until 1968, when my mother gave birth to my brother Paul, a North Carolina native who has since grown to become both my father's best ally and worst nightmare. He was a child who, by the time he had reached the second grade, spoke much like the toothless fishermen casting their nets into the Albemarle Sound. This is a grown man who now phones his father to say, "Motherfucker, I ain't seen pussy in so long I'll throw stones at it!" My brother's voice, like my own, is high-pitched and girlish. Telephone solicitors frequently ask to speak to our husbands or request that we put our mommies on the line. The Raleigh accent is soft and beautifully cadenced, but my brother's is a more complex hybrid, informed by his professional relationships with marble-mouthed deep country work crews and his abiding love of hardcore rap music. He talks so fast that even his friends have a hard time understanding him. It's like listening to a foreigner and deciphering only shit, motherfucker, bitch, and the single phrase, "You can't kill the rooster." The rooster is what Paul calls himself when he's feeling threatened. Asked how he came up with that name, he says only, "Certain motherfuckers think they can fuck with my shit, but you can't kill the rooster. You might can fuck them up sometimes, but bitch, nobody kills a motherfucking rooster. You know what I'm saying?" It often seems that my brother and I were raised in two completely different households. He's 11 years younger than I am, and by the time he reached high school, the rest of us had all left home. When I was young, we weren't allowed to say shut up, but once the rooster hit puberty, it had become acceptable to shout, "Shut your motherfucking hole." The drug laws had changed as well. No smoking pot became no smoking pot in the house, before it finally petered out to, "Please don't smoke any more pot in the living room." My mother was, for the most part, delighted with my brother, and regarded him with the bemused curiosity of a brood hen discovering she had hatched a completely different species. "I think it was very nice of Paul to give me this vase," she once said, arranging a bouquet of wildflowers into the skull-shaped bong my brother had left on the dining room table. "It's non-traditional, but that's the rooster's way. He's a free spirit, and we're lucky to have him." Like most everyone else in our suburban neighborhood, we were raised to meet a certain standard. My father expected me to attend an Ivy League university where I'd make straight A's, play football, and spend my off hours strumming guitar with the student jazz combo. My inability to throw a football was exceeded only by my inability to master the guitar. My grades were average at best, and eventually I learned to live with my father's disappointment. Fortunately, there were 6 of us children, and it was easy to get lost in the crowd. My sisters and I managed to sneak beneath the wire of his expectations, but we worried about my brother, who was seen as the family's last hope. From the age of 10, Paul was being dressed in Brooks Brothers suits and tiny clip-on rep ties. He endured trumpet lessons, soccer camp, church-sponsored basketball tournaments, and after-school sessions with well-meaning tutors who would politely change the subject when asked about the Roosters' chances of getting into Yale or Princeton. Fast and well-coordinated, Paul enjoyed sports, but not enough to take them seriously. School failed to interest him on any level, and the neighbors were greatly relieved when he finally retired his trumpet. His response to our father's impossible and endless demands has, over time, become something of a mantra. Short and sweet, repeated at a fever pitch, it goes simply, fuck it. Or, on one of his more articulate days, fuck it, motherfucker. That shit don't mean fuck to me. My brother politely ma'ams and sirs all strangers, but refers to friends and family, his father included, as either bitch or motherfucker. Friends are appalled at the way he speaks to his only remaining parent. The 2 of them once visited my sister Amy and me in New York, and we celebrated with a dinner party. When my father complained about his aching feet, the rooster set down his 2-liter bottle of Mountain Dew and removed a fistful of prime rib from his mouth, saying, "Bitch, you need to have them ugly-ass bunions shaved down is what you need to do, but you can't do shit about it tonight, so lighten up, motherfucker." All eyes went to my father, who chuckled, saying only, "I guess you have a point." A stranger might reasonably interpret my brother's language as a lack of respect and view my father's response as a form of shameful surrender. This, though, would be missing the subtle beauty of their relationship. The 2 of them are unapologetically blunt. It's a quality my father admires so much he's able to ignore the foul language completely. "That Paul," he says, "now there's a guy who knows how to communicate." When words fail him, the rooster has been known to communicate with his fists, which, though quick and solid, are no larger than a couple of tangerines. At 5'4", he's shorter than I am, stocky but not exactly intimidating. The year he turned 30, we celebrated Christmas at the home of my older sister Lisa. Paul arrived a few hours late with scraped palms and a black eye. There had been some encounter at a bar, but the details were sketchy. "Some motherfucker told me to get the fuck out of his motherfucking face. I said, fuck off, fuckface." Then what? Then he turned away and I reached out and punched him on the back of his motherfucking neck. What happened next? "What the fuck you think happened next, bitch? I ran like hell and the motherfucker caught up with me in the fucking parking lot. He's all beefy, all flexed up and shit. The motherfucker had a taste for blood and he just pummeled my ass." When did he stop? My brother tapped his fingertips against the tabletop for a few moments before saying, "I'm guessing he stopped when he was fucking finished." The physical pain had passed, but it bothered Paul that his face was all lopsided and shit for the fucking holidays. That said, he retreated to the bathroom with my sister Amy's makeup kit and returned to the table with 2 black eyes, a second drawn on with mascara. This seemed to please him, and he wore his matching bruises for the rest of the evening. "Did you get a load of that fake black eye?" my father asked. "That guy ought to do makeup for the movies. I'm telling you, the kid's a real artist." Unlike the rest of us, the rooster has always enjoyed our father's support and encouragement. With the dream of college officially dead and buried, he sent my brother to technical school, hoping he might develop an interest in computers. 3 weeks into the semester, Paul dropped out, and my father, convinced that his son's lawn mowing skills bordered on genius, set him up in the landscaping business. I've seen him in action, and what he does is establish a pattern and really tackle it. Eventually, my brother fell into the floor sanding business. It's hard work, but he enjoys the satisfaction that comes with a well-finished rec room. He thoughtfully called his company Silly P's Hardwood Floors, Silly P being the name he would have chosen were he a rap star. When my father suggested that the word silly might frighten away some of the upper-tier customers, Paul considered changing the name to Silly Fucking P's Hardwood Floors. The work puts him in contact with plumbers and carpenters from such towns as Bunn and Clayton. Men who offer dating advice such as, if she's old enough to bleed, she's old enough to breed. Old enough to what, my father asked. Paul, those aren't the sorts of people you need to be associating with. What are you doing with hayseeds like that? The goal is to better yourself. Meet some intellectuals. Read a book. After all these years, our father has never understood that we, his children, tend to gravitate toward the very people he spent his life warning us about. Most of us have left town, but my brother remains in Raleigh. He was there when our mother died, and still, years later, he continues to help our father grieve. The past is gone, Hoss. What you need now is some motherfucking pussy. Well, my sisters and I offer our sympathy long distance. Paul is the one who arrives at our father's house on Thanksgiving Day, offering to prepare traditional beef dishes to the best of his ability. It is a fact that he once made a tray of spanakopita using ham rather than melted butter. Still, though, at least he tries. When a hurricane damaged my father's house, my brother rushed over with a gas grill, 3 coolers full of beer, and an enormous box bucket. Plastic pails filled with jawbreakers and bite-sized candy bars. When shit brings you down, just say fuck it and eat yourself some motherfucking candy. There was no electricity for close to a week. The yard was practically clear of trees, and rain fell through the dozens of holes punched into the roof. It was a difficult time, but the 2 of them stuck it out. My brother placing his small, scarred hand on my father's shoulder to say, "Bitch, I'm here to tell you that it's going to be all right. You'll get through this shit. Just you wait." This is something that I just finished a little while ago. It's for Esquire. There's a lot of magazines on the back page, and someone backed out. They asked me if I could come to March season, and I got my line there. Which I don't know if anyone's those things are amazing. In a hollowed-out stump near an ice-covered pool lived a wee, lonely leprechaun, as far as I told. As custom would have it, he wore a green suit, washed next door years ago while en route from Shannon to Schaumburg, out of Manhattan, the fancy of the river, the deck of the Satin, but had a frayed collar and line-coated lining, whose slogans found themselves modeling and pining for Seamus and Dugan and Killing the Question. Not only had friends, but mainly black and for like-minded neighbors, like Master speech with someone who's seen as conscious of a souvenir picture-clad power-going shrimp who spoke with an accent and dressed like a pimp. While the sprites and their friends often gathered to dance, hobnob with elves and barbecue ants, they never extended an invite to Mary. Oh, whatever that all said, we know her before, with stories of shamrocks and polished ladies and drunkards who filled their coffee with Baileys. He should find his own time and just leave us alone. This part of the woods is a grimy tree zone. Morris left steadily chasing the Esquire, blue leaf in his hat and sat on a drive, not far from his teacher, he said to himself, and saw on it dozens of leprechaun lasses, dressed in jean tank tops and emerald nighties, a ballad of certified New for dummies. The bold leather headline that "Come Get Polluted," there's drum stations and the horns included, a patio sandwich on Northington Hill, just after tomorrow's St. Patrick's Day. The flyer by chance had included a map of Cloverleaf Highway with 2 handicapped to someone with nose who couldn't hear a news of something of interest that could even tell Jesus. A good Chicago was just passing, who's such an would have done had he rushed to my side rather than stepping over my body to touch the best man. Call me unimaginative, but I still can't think of anyone else I'd rather do this. I wouldn't want to fix what on a daily basis. I don't ever expect to do anything. On our worst days, I figure things will work themselves out. Otherwise, I really don't do it myself. Neither of us would ever think we could get better than we think confess love is the problem for the most of it. But we never consciously stigmatize this type of relationship. We only listen. The responders here as well, and it's almost so amazing. And was reminded that we don't have other options. The picture ended at around 10, and afterwards we went to the park to the other place across the street from the Luxembourg Garden. I was ready to write the movie out of my mind, but Hugh was holding to the wall. He looked as though his life had not only passed him by, but crossed along the way with a spit in his face. The coffees arrived, and he drew his nose into the napkin. I encouraged him to look on the bright side. "No, sir," he said. "You may be down living more than London, but in terms of the occasional police force, there isn't much of a place there. We both love taxidermy. We take vacations to fun places like Croatia. What more could you possibly want?" What more could you want? It was an incredibly stupid question. And when he failed to answer, I was reminded of just how lucky I really am. Movie characters might pay for another through the fog or race down the stairs of burning buildings, but that's just the beginning. Real love knows to withhold in the truth, even when you always take that opportunity to hurt them with feelings. I wanted to say something to this effect, but my hand puppets were back home in the drawer. Instead, I pulled my chair a few inches closer, and we sat silently at our little table in the square, looking for all the world like two people who might. This is something photographed about This American Life called Million Bubbles. And I just wanted a little short story of something that happened in the car. I don't drive. I never even drive, so all my car experience is really It wasn't anything I'd planned on, but at the age of 22, after dropping out of my second college and traveling back and forth across the country a few times, I found myself back in Raleigh, North Carolina, living in my parents' basement. After 6 months spent waking at noon, getting high, and listening to the same daily nickel record over and over again, my father called me into his den and told me to get out. He was sitting very formally in a big, comfortable chair behind his desk, and I felt as though he was firing me from the job of being his son. I'd seen this coming, and I was sitting mobbing me all that week. The way I saw it, getting kicked out of the house was just what I needed if I was ever going to get back on my feet. "Come on," I said. "I'll go. Maybe one day you'll be..." I had no idea what I meant by this. It just seemed like the sort of thing a person should say when being told to leave. My sister Lisa had an apartment over by the university and said that I could come stay with her as long as I didn't bring my Johnny Nickel record. My mother offered to drive me over and I was to Bombay. I took her up on it. It was a 15-minute trip across town, and on the way, my mother and I listened to the new broadcast of a radio call-in show in which people phoned the host to describe the various birds gathered around their backyard heaters. Normally the show came on in the morning, and it seemed strange to listen to it at night. The birds in question had gone to bed hours ago. They probably had no idea they were still being talked about. I chewed this over and wondered if anyone back at the house was talking about me. To the best of my knowledge, no one ever tried to imitate my voice to describe the shape of my head. But it was depressing that I went unnoticed while a great many people seemed willing to drop everything for a fragment. My mother pulled up in front of my sister's apartment building, and when I opened the car door, she started to cry, which worried those I'm going to miss you things, but something sadder and more desperate than that. I wouldn't know it until months later, but my father had kicked me out of the house, not because I was a bum, but because I was gay. Our little talk was supposed to be one of those defining moments that shape a person's adult life, but he'd been so uncomfortable with the most important word that he left it out completely, saying only, I think we both know why I'm doing this. I guess I could have nailed him down. I decided to see the point. Is it because I'm a failure? A drug addict? A sponge? Come on, Dad, just give me one good reason. My mother assumed that I knew the truth and it tore her apart. Here was yet another defining moment, and again I missed it entirely. She cried until it sounded as if she were choking. I'm sorry, she said. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. I figured that within a few weeks I'd have a job in some tiny little apartment. It didn't seem insurmountable, but my mother's tears made me worry that saying these things might be a little harder than I thought. Did she honestly think I was that much of a loser? Really, I said, I'd be fine. The car light was on, and I wondered what the passing drivers thought as they watched my mother sob. What kind of people did they think we were? Did they think she was one of those crybaby moms who fell apart every time someone shipped a coffee cup? Did they assume I'd said something to hurt her? Did they see us as just another crying mother and her stoned gay son, sitting in a station wagon and listening to a call-in show about birds? Or did they imagine, for just one moment, that we might be special? Here's this, I don't know how this will work. There's a magazine called Straight to Hell. Is anyone familiar with Straight to Hell? It's a magazine where homosexuals write in their true sexual experiences. So it's got little headlines like father and son, like three truckers and me, or and it's just really, really graphic. People write in there, and for some reason they had a benefit, Straight to Hell, and they asked me to participate in it. And like they asked me to participate in it, and there were like people that I knew who participated in it too, and they got up there and they read these really graphic sexual descriptions of their adventures. And so this is what I offered. Dear editor, I'm hoping I have the correct address, as this is the 8th letter I've sent, and I have yet to see a single one appear in print. What gives? You've claimed to print only true stories, and I have consistently included both the names and phone numbers of all my contacts, so that your fact-checkers might have an easier time verifying the details. As I stated before, dozens of my letters and opinions have appeared in such highly regarded regional publications as Outhouse, Outsmart, Outfit, Outburst, Outrage, Outdate, Options, Lavender Triad, Personal Best, and Splashy. I have enclosed several which you might read at your leisure. Some of them are signed Victor, others Buck or Angus, but I can assure you they were all written by me, Jerry Stack. Lay them out side by side and you'll notice stylistic resemblance. It's not that I'm ashamed to publish under my real name, far from it. It's just that certain editors of certain magazines tend to get so full of themselves that they hesitate to print more than 4 or 5 editorials by the same author because they feel threatened. I'm not suggesting that is the case with you, but just for the record, let me say that my first love is writing, not editing. I have no designs on your job, not to knock you or what you do. I'm not knocking anyone or anything. I'm just knocking. Knock, knock. Who's there? Me, Jerry Stack, with another story, a true story, my story. See following page. It was April 14th, balmy. A A southeasterly wind had visited our region, carrying with it a false sense of summer. Backing out of the driveway early that morning, I noticed the tulips were beginning to bud, their delicate petals reminding me of newborn chicks, opening their beaks to receive a mouth-watering worm or grub. I drove the 3 miles to my office, thinking first of the tulips, and then of Brad. And I chuckled to myself. Tulips, Brad. Let me explain that I have a rather complex system for recalling names, because in my business, a keen waste disposal background and a good memory are half the battle. For instance, yesterday I spent my afternoon butting heads with a client who complained that one of our installation crews had littered her front yard with styrofoam BBs and empty soda cans. Oh, she was mad as a hornet. And what was her name? Barbara Manning. Barb, razor-sharp metals. Manning. She walked like a man. Barbara Manning. I returned to the office later that afternoon and received a message from the temp who's covering while our regular receptionist, Tatum, is on leave receiving a kidney from her stepson. The kidney is free. The temp's name is Frida. Frida. Bingo. My mind works along those lines: association, wordplay, observation. But believe me the first time I laid eyes on Brad, I knew I needn't worry about remembering his name. It never occurred to me to think Brad as in paperclip. His name attached itself to my heart and mind with all the force of a staple gun. Which is ironic, because that just happens to be his last name. His people came over from Cazenovia, and this is so funny. Their original last name was so long and convoluted that the immigration officer just pointed to the desk and told them they had a choice between the surname ashtray, codeine, or staple gun. That was all they had left. This was sometime in the 1920s. Otherwise, his last name might be PC or Diet Dr. Pepper or Little Troll Doll. It makes you think, doesn't it? I know it makes me think. Think about Brad and his lover, CJ. That's another name I'm not likely to forget, CJ. Like I see the jays huddled around the bird feeder, hassling the sparrows as I sit in my breakfast nook, enjoying my first steaming mug of cocoa each morning. CJ's blistered face the time he fell asleep under the sun lamp and came to the office in search of Brad, hungry for TLC. CJ making snide remarks about his lover's career. CJ denying his addiction to cigarettes and cough medicines. Oh, I see Jay all right. I see Jay loud and clear. He stomps his way into my mind's eye every time I imagine Brad and I alone together. CJ. It was late, around 9:15, following the company's St. Patrick's Day March on Management meeting. Brad and I had each enjoyed our fair share of shandies and agreed to walk skittishly in Skidmore to her car. She buckled her seatbelt, locked her driver's side door, gave a quick wave, and then, just as she was backing out of her parking space, Brad let loose of her hood, and in doing so, his left hand just sort of brushed against my shoulder. We locked eyes beneath the glare of Lynn's headlights, and it was just brief, just fleeting, but I could tell by the look on his face that in that instant he was thinking of cuddling me the same way I thought of cuddling him. And then we both turned away and the moment was gone. So that's my story. I've included the names and numbers of everyone involved. If you call Brad's house and CJ answers, I suggest you hang up. He wasn't there that night. Besides, this is just between me and Brad, and, of course, whoever else reads your magazine. Anxiously awaiting your reply, Jerry Stack. Let's see here. Okay. This is another story from the book. And it's called Pickapocatoni. It was July, and Hugh and I were taking the Paris Metro from our neighborhood to a store where we hoped to buy a good deal of burlap. The store was located on the other side of town, and the trip involved taking one train and then switching to another. During the summer months, a great number of American vacationers can be found riding the metro, and their voices tend to carry. It's something I hadn't noticed until leaving home, but we are a loud people, the trumpeting elephants of the human race. Questions, observations, the locations of blisters and rashes, everything is delivered as though it were an announcement. On the first of our 2 trains, I listened to a quartet of college-age Texans who sat beneath a sign instructing passengers to surrender their folding seats and stand should the foyer of the train become too crowded. The foyer of the train quickly became too crowded, and while others stood to make more room, the young Texans remained seated and raised their voices in order to continue their debate, the topic being, which is a better city, Houston or Paris? It was a hot afternoon, and the subject of air conditioning came into play. Houston had it. Paris did not. Houston also had ice cubes, tacos, plenty of free parking, and something called a Sonic burger. Things were not looking good for Paris, which lost valuable points every time the train stopped to accept more passengers. The crowds packed in, surrounding the seated Texans and reducing them to 4 disembodied voices. From the far corner of the car, one of them shouted that they were tired and dirty and ready to catch the next plane home. The voice was weary and hopeless, and I identified completely. It was the same way I'd felt on my last visit to Houston. Hugh and I disembarked to the strains of Texas, Our Texas, and boarded our second train, where an American couple in their late 40s stood hugging the floor-to-ceiling support pole. There's no sign saying so, but such poles are not considered private. They're put there for everyone's use. You don't treat it like a fireman's pole. Rather, you grasp it with one hand and stand back at a respectable distance. It's not all that difficult to figure out, even if you come from a town without any public transportation. The train left the station, and needing something to hold on to, I wedged my hand between the American couple and grabbed the pole at waist level. The man then turned to the woman, saying, "P.U., can you smell that? That is pure French, baby." He removed one of his hands from the pole and waved it back and forth in front of his face. "Yes, indeed," he said. "This little froggy is ripe." It took a moment to realize he was talking about me. The woman wrinkled her nose. "Golly, Pete," she said, "do they all smell this bad?" "It's pretty typical," the man said. "I'm willing to bet that our little friend here hasn't had a bath in a good 2 weeks. I mean, Jesus Christ, someone should hang a deodorizer around this guy's neck." The woman laughed, saying, "You crack me up, Martin. I swear you do." It's a common mistake for vacationing Americans to assume that everyone around them is French and therefore speaks no English whatsoever. These 2 didn't seem like exceptionally mean people. Back home, they probably would have had the decency to whisper, but here they felt free to say whatever they wanted, face to face and in a normal tone of voice. It was the same way someone might talk in front of a building or a painting they found particularly unpleasant. An experienced traveler could have told by looking at my shoes that I wasn't French. And even if I were French, it's not as if English is some mysterious tribal dialect spoken only by anthropologists and a small population of cannibals. They happen to teach English in schools all over the world. There are no eligibility requirements. Anyone can learn it. Even people who reportedly smell bad, despite the fact that they've just taken a bath and are wearing clean clothes. Because they had used the tiresome word froggy and complained about my odor, I was now licensed to hate this couple as much as I wanted. This made me happy, as I'd wanted to hate them from the moment I'd entered the subway car. Unleashed by their insults, I was now free to criticize Martin's clothing. The pleated denim shorts, the baseball cap, the t-shirt advertising a San Diego pizza restaurant. Sunglasses hung from his neck on a fluorescent cable, and the couple's bright new his and her sneakers suggested that they might be headed somewhere dressy for dinner. Comfort has its place, but it seems rude to visit another country dressed as if you've come to mow its lawns. The man named Martin was in the process of showing the woman what he referred to as my Paris. He looked at the subway map and announced that at some point during their stay, he'd maybe take her to the Louvre, which he pronounced as having two distinct syllables. Louvre. I'm hardly qualified to belittle anyone else's pronunciation, but he was setting himself up by acting like such an expert. Yeah, he said, I thought we might head over there someday this week and do some nosing around. It's not for everyone, but something tells me that you might like it. People are often frightened of Parisians, but an American in Paris will find no harsher critic than another American. France isn't even my country, but there I was, deciding that these people needed to be sent back home, preferably in chains. In disliking them, I was forced to recognize my own pretension, and that made me hate them even more. The train took a curve, and when I moved my hand further up the pole, the man turned to the woman saying, Carol, hey Carol, watch out. That guy's going after your wallet. What? Your wallet, Martin said. That joker's trying to steal your wallet. Move your pocketbook to the front where he can't get at it. She froze, and he repeated himself, barking, the front! Move your pocketbook around to the front! Do it now! The guy's a pickpocket! The woman named Carol grabbed for the strap on her shoulder and moved her pocketbook so that it now rested upon her stomach. Wow, she said. I sure didn't see that coming. Well, you've never been to Paris before, but let that be a lesson to you. Martin glared at me. His eyes narrowed to slits. This city is full of stinkpots like our little friend here. Let your guard down and they'll take you for everything you've got. Now I was a stinkpot and a thief. It occurred to me to say something, but I thought it might be better to wait and see what he came up with next. Besides, if I said something at this point, he probably would have apologized, and I wasn't interested in that. His embarrassment would have pleased me, but once he recovered, there would be that awkward period that sometimes culminates in a handshake. I didn't want to touch these people's hands or see things from their point of view. I just wanted to continue hating them. And so I kept my mouth shut and stared off into space. The train stopped at the next station. Passengers got off, and Carol and Martin moved to occupy two folding seats located beside the door. I thought they might ease on to another topic, but Martin was on a roll now, and there was no stopping him. It was some shithead like him that stole my wallet on my last trip to Paris, he said, nodding his head in my direction. He got me on the subway, came up from behind, and I never felt a thing. Cash, credit card, driver's license, poof, all of it gone, just like that. I pictured a scoreboard reading, Marty, 0, Stinkpots, 1. What you've got to understand is that these creeps are practice professionals, he said. I mean, they've really got it down to an art, if you can call that an art form. I wouldn't call it an art form, Carol said. Art is beautiful, but taking people's wallets, that stinks in my opinion. Well, you got that right, Martin said. The thing is that these jokers usually work in pairs. He squinted toward the opposite end of the car. Odds are that he's probably got a partner somewhere on this subway car. You think so? I know so, he said. They usually time it so that one of them clips your wallet just as the train pulls into the station. The other guy's job is to run interference and trip you up once you catch wind of what's going on. Then the train stops, the doors open, and they disappear into the crowd. If Stinky there had gotten his way, he'd probably be halfway to Timbuktu by now. I mean, make no mistake, these guys are fast. I'm not the sort of person normally mistaken for being fast and well-coordinated. And because of this, I found Martin's assumption to be oddly flattering. Stealing wallets was nothing to be proud of, but I liked being thought of as cunning and professional. I'd been up until 4 a.m. the night before, reading a book about recluse spiders, but to him the circles beneath my eyes likely reflected a long evening spent snatching flies out of the air, or whatever it is that pickpockets do for practice. The meatball, he said. Look at him just standing there waiting for his next victim. If I had my way, he'd be picking pockets with his teeth. An eye for an eye, that's what I say. Someone ought to chop the guy's hands off and feed him to the dogs. Oh, I thought, but first you'll have to catch me. It just gets my goat, he said. I mean, where's a Polizione when you need one? Polizione? Where did he think he was? I tried to imagine Martin's conversation with the French policeman and pictured him waving his arms, shouting, "That man tried to pick up my friend's Pacatoni." I wanted very much to hear such a conversation, and decided that I would take the wallet from Hugh's back pocket as we left the train. Martin would watch me steal from a supposed stranger and would most likely intercede. He'd put me in a headlock or yell for help, and when a crowd gathered, I'd say, "What's the problem? Is it against the law to borrow money from my own boyfriend?" If the police came, he would explain the situation in his perfect French, while I'd toss in a few of my most polished phrases. "That guy's crazy," I'd say, pointing at Martin. "I think he's drunk. Look at how his face is swollen." I was practicing these lines to myself when Hugh came up from behind and tapped me on the shoulder, signaling that the next stop was ours. "There you go," Martin said. "That's him. That's a partner. Didn't I tell you he was around here somewhere? They always work in pairs. It's the oldest trick in the book." Hugh had been reading the paper and had no idea what had been going on. It was too late now to pretend to pick his pocket, and I was stuck without a decent backup plan. As we pulled into the station, I recalled an afternoon 10 years earlier. I'd been riding the Chicago L with my sister Amy, who was getting off 3 or 4 stops ahead of me. The doors opened, and as she stepped out of the crowded car, she turned around to yell, "So long, David! Good luck beating that rape charge!" Everyone on board had turned to stare at me. Some seemed curious, some seemed frightened, but the overwhelming majority appeared to hate me with a passion I had never known. "That's my sister," I said. "She likes to joke around." I laughed and smiled, but it did no good. Every gesture made me appear more guilty, and I wound up getting off at the next stop rather than continue riding alongside people who thought of me as a rapist. I wanted to say something that good to Martin, but I can't think as fast as Amy. In the end, this man would go home warning his friends to watch out for pickpockets in Paris. He'd be the same old Martin, but at least for the next few seconds I still had the opportunity to be somebody different, somebody quick and dangerous. The dangerous me noticed how Martin tightened his fists when the train pulled to a stop. Carol held her pocketbook close against her chest and sucked in her breath as Hugh and I stepped out of the car. No longer finicky little boyfriends on their overseas experiment, but rogues, accomplices, halfway to Timbuktu. This is something I wrote for Morning Edition last summer. Before coming to France, my worst nightmare was that something would go wrong and I'd be forced to visit a doctor. This fear had nothing to do with the state of French medicine in particular. Call me squeamish, but I didn't want to couple extreme physical pain with what even the kindest doctor would identify as a considerable language barrier. On the best of days, I talked not unlike Yoda, the donkey-eared gnome from the Dagobah system. Were someone to needlessly remove both of my kidneys, chances are I would have accidentally instructed him to do so. I'd have no one but myself to blame, and that bothered me. Another fear had to do with money. The last time I'd visited a New York doctor, it had cost me $225 just to limp through the door. The spot diagnosis of housewife's knee had cost me another $150, and the anti-inflammatories had set me back even further. Shortly after moving into my Paris apartment, I noticed a leak in the bathroom and phoned the landlord to say, "The toilet, she cry much of the time." A plumber was sent, and after working for all of half an hour, he charged me $1,000 for a replacement. In New York, I could have gotten that same toilet for $300. Based on the price of a relatively minor plumbing problem, I figured that a Paris doctor would cost at least 3 times the price of a New York doctor. In order to pay the bill, I'd have to write a check, which would involve having to correctly spell a series of very high numbers. My fear of tumors is nothing compared to my fear of spelling, and so I made it a point to avoid plagues and try to remain as healthy as possible. Given all my assorted little phobias, it is unfortunate that my move to France coincided with what appears to be the systematic physical breakdown of my body. It started with my teeth, which I'd always hoped might eventually improve on their own, preferably overnight while I was sleeping. In my mind, I'd just been to the dentist, but in fact, the child born on the day of my last checkup would now be 13 years old, with bleeding gums of his own. A French friend recommended it to Dr. Gesmar, and when I could no longer manage to bite into a banana, I went. The bad news involved a bloody hook and the realization that the only thing holding my mouth together had been 2 inches of plaque. The good news was that my 45 minutes in the chair wound up costing the equivalent of $40, which is a great price for close to an hour of unrelenting pain. The first time I visited Dr. Gesmar, he went along and did most of the talking. The second and third time, I went alone and found that I did a fine job all by myself. I told her that when I had 15 years, I had worn a fence in my mouth. And then I continued, effectively asking such hard-hitting questions as, if a tooth budges today, can he live in my mouth tomorrow? And are mine the most sick teeth you have seen in a lifetime? The dentist laughed at my second question, saying, don't be silly. Got the worst gums I've seen in years, but the teeth themselves are strong and healthy. After my third visit, she set me up with a periodontist named Dr. Geig and told me she'll be happy to cap whichever teeth he allows me to keep. My visits to the dentist left me confident enough to make an appointment with an eye doctor. From the time I had 5 years, I have worn of myself some glasses, I told him. Then, when I had 20 years, I said, enough of this. I am tired of something living all the time upon my nose. The doctor looked at his watch as I nattered on, explaining that after many years of lazy eyes, I was now ready to enter the door of good seeing. How do you think of that now? I got a new pair of glasses and am still adjusting to all the subtle things I've been missing all these years. Things like the expressions of disgust that traditionally cross people's faces when they discover that they're talking to an idiot. When I'd finished with the eye doctor, I made an appointment at a hospital specializing in dermatology and another word I couldn't quite make out. A word that turned out to mean venereal disease. I went hoping to have a harmless growth removed from beneath my left eye and was confused when the doctor instructed me to remove all of my clothing and lie naked upon the table. Can we say goodbye to the little red spot who live on my face, I asked. After examining me for syphilis and searching for missing children in my rectum, the doctor removed a roll of mole from my leg and handed me a bill for $25. Can we please say goodbye to the red spot who live on my face, I asked the receptionist. The woman made a follow-up appointment where, for another $25, a surgeon removed the growth from beneath my left eye and performed a biopsy on the ugly brown splotch that's taking over my nose. It was simple. I considered having a colonoscopy just for the fun of it. But it turned out that my next medical procedure was an unscheduled trip to the emergency room, where I learned the word for kidney stone. The one time I'd gone to a New York emergency room, I'd waited for close to 3 hours. Here in Paris, there was no line at all, and 5 minutes after my arrival, I was in a private room, enjoying an IV of glucose and Demerol. An attractive male nurse wrapped me in a blanket and wheeled me down to the radiology lab, where, floating high above the pain, I watched an episode of Charlie's Angels dubbed into French. When, at my request, this same male nurse brought me an ashtray, I knew that there was no real reason to ever return to the United States. At no point during my 4-hour stay did anyone ask if I had health insurance. I was instructed to sign nothing, and payment was not discussed until I brought it up myself. Pay, the doctor said. Oh, you can pay the next time you come in. Or I guess we could send you a bill. I asked if she had my address, and she said, "No, but you can give it to me if you want to." It was as if everyone was on Demerol. My emergency room visit wound up costing me $100. Were I a citizen, the government would reimburse all the money I've spent on my eyes, teeth, face, and kidneys. I'd be covered for everything, including the cost of medication. As it is, I'd have to have a heart transplant in order to meet the deductible on the worthless American health insurance I signed up for before leaving New York. The downside is that I have to pay my own French medical bills. The upswing is that the bills are so low, I can finally afford to be a hypochondriac, which makes me so happy I could die. And then I'm just going to read a few little things from my diary. Hugh and I spent the weekend in Normandy while his mother Joan stayed in Paris to take care of our cat. Before we left, she bought a bottle of wine, and I warned her that she might want to pick up a decent corkscrew because Hugh's is worthless. Every time I use it, I wind up pushing in the cork with the screwdriver. I returned to Paris this afternoon, and shortly afterwards, Joan walked through the door carrying a sack of groceries and a new corkscrew, the type with the 2 prongs. "Boy, you were right about that corkscrew of Hugh's," she said. "I couldn't get it to do anything." When I pointed out that she just bought an exact replica of her son's corkscrew, she gave me a blank look, saying, "What are you talking about? I thought this was Hugh's corkscrew." She opened a drawer and pulled out a palm-sized plastic disc attached to a shallow coupling. "This part fits over the top of the bottle, but when I tried turning it towards the arrow, nothing happened." It was for me one of those adult moments involving a choice. Do you shrug your shoulders and say, "I couldn't get it to work either"? Or do you tell the woman she spent the weekend trying to open a wine bottle with a broken knob to the dishwasher? I chose the latter, adding that the oven dials don't work that well either. "Oh," she said, "I feel so stupid. Just promise me that you won't tell anybody about this." Me? Who would I tell? I called my sister Lisa last night after Hugh and I returned from London. Her husband Bob picked up, and I talked with the two of them until it was time for Bob's pies to come out of the oven. He got off the phone, and Lisa told me that a few days earlier she'd accidentally put a used Kotex through the wash. Bob had pulled it, clean and fluffy, from the dryer and approached her saying, "Lisa, you're not supposed to wash these things, are you?" Lisa said she guessed not, and he continued, "And doesn't a person usually use 2 of them? I sorted through everything, but I guess you forgot to wash the other one." Lisa said, "The other what?" And Bob said, "Shoulder pads, silly, isn't that what we just been talking about?" He handed her the clean, warm Kotex, and she placed it in her dresser drawer, wondering what he might have thought had she still been using tampons. In 1977, I met a girl named Dawn Erickson who taught me that in order to ensure good luck, you're supposed to say "rabbit, rabbit" on the first day of every month. It has to be the very first thing that comes out of your mouth, and it must be said out loud, or else it doesn't work. I've never been a great believer in luck, but that all changed after meeting Dawn Erickson. Pretty much everything I have can be attributed to Rabbit Rabbit, including Hugh, who started saying it shortly after we met. This is a big help, as he's got a good head for dates and is always the first one to wake up. He says "Rabbit, Rabbit," I repeat it, and then I go back to sleep, confident that I won't get sued for another 30 days. When he's away, I leave notes on the bed and the medicine cabinet mirror, reminding me that it's a first. This generally works, but when it doesn't, the doom settles in, and I spend the next 4 weeks running after buses and scraping the shit off my shoes. On the 31st of last month, I was in New York staying with my sister. Amy has a dwarf rabbit named Tattletale that's been trained to use a litter box and roams freely throughout her apartment, happily chewing through the phone and cable wires. Her feeding mat is in the bedroom, surrounded by the dozens of pictures and gewgaws people tend to give you when you own a rabbit. I logically assumed I'd need no reminder, but when I woke at 7 a.m. with Tattletale chewing on my eyelashes, my first words weren't rabbit, rabbit, but rather, get the fuck away from me! Hence the kidney stones. I left my friend Evelyn's house at 4:30 this morning and walked a few blocks before flagging down a cab. The driver was a thin, butter-colored man with stained fingertips and dyed black hair that sat on his head like a small, shiny saddle. I stepped into the back seat and he asked me my name, saying, "So tell me, Dave, you see any pussy out there tonight?" "I beg your pardon?" "Pussy, Dave, pussy. You seen any?" I said I hadn't noticed any, but then again, some might have slipped by while I wasn't looking. "A lot of times you can see some pussy walking further south on Montrose," he said, "but a lot of that is sick pussy." I said nothing, but still he continued, acting as though I'd been the one to start the conversation. "Of course it's a little cold out tonight, Dave. It's late, so a lot of that pussy is probably at home getting some sleep." He spoke as though a vagina had a mind of its own and the ability to move around as it saw fit. "If you're interested, I can give you a tip on some pretty nice pussy," he said. "First class all the way. Lives not far from here, and I'm pretty sure it's wide awake and raring to go." Again, it was the notion of independence that got to me. I pictured a vagina walking through the door of a realtor's office and arranging to rent an apartment. I know I put those references somewhere. "So what do you say, Dave? Are we on?" Having spent the last few weeks on college campuses, it was refreshing to hear someone make such an honest and open ass of himself. It didn't bother me that he so casually used the word pussy, but I was insulted by the automatic assumption that I was a heterosexual, trawling the streets for a vagina, either with or without its owner. If that's what this man saw when he looked in his rearview mirror, he obviously had no business driving a car or operating any machinery larger than a can opener. He asked again if we were on, and I said I would be, had my dick not taken off earlier in the evening. "There's no telling where it is now," I said. And what's worse, I think the son of a bitch took my wallet." I had a reading in Marin County and was driven up from San Francisco by a woman named Bridget. We were talking about the English and the savage nature of their criticism when she told me the following story. Pia Zadora, who is maybe the least talented actress in the world, was playing the title role in the London production of The Diary of Anne Frank. This apparently being the version in which the blonde, blue-eyed Anne whiles away her time doing bust exercises. According to Bridget, she was so bad that towards the end of the play, when the Nazis entered the stage, an audience member stood to shout, "She's in the attic!" Last night in Palm Beach, I read the little entry about Pia Zadora, and I can't recall ever getting a bigger laugh. I was lying in bed this morning, reliving the moment, when a stranger named Terry called to tell me that the story wasn't true. According to his sources, Pia Zadora has never appeared on the London stage, much less in the role of Anne Frank. The whole thing's a variation of an old George Burns joke that was later retooled for a TV program called The Golden Girls. When I thanked Terry for his call, I was genuine. Really, I was. The response had been great, but I swear I'll never read that thing again. I'm just not that type of person. My friend Abe went to Eastern Europe and stopped in Paris on his way back to San Diego. We were at the zoo, watching the monkeys beat one another with sticks, when he told me about a recent E. coli outbreak in Romania. A couple hundred people got sick, and the government sent an agent to investigate. The source was eventually traced to a baker who'd been tainting his breads and pastries with the human feces they found hidden in his walk-in cooler, stored in a plastic bucket. "My only question," Abe said, "is why did he keep the bucket of shit in the refrigerator? I mean, what? Did he worry it would go bad?" My friend James Wong loaned me a cookbook called Imperial Dishes of China, and I found myself reading it as though it were a collection of perfectly titled short stories. 100 Birds Paying Homage to the Phoenix was a little drawn out, but coming in a simple page and a half, Monkey Heads on a Pine Tree was a masterpiece of suspense and efficiency. In France, I often leaf through cookbooks in search of vocabulary words I think might come in handy. It's how I learned the verbs to simmer, to dice, and to set aside the beak. The Imperial Dishes cookbook was in English, but still I felt as though I'd come away with something valuable. Here were instructions such as rinse the lips twice in cold water and remove the penis and carve it into bite-sized pieces. The dietary issues aside, it was alarming to read such things in the form of a direct order. Scald the vagina and remove any remaining hairs sounds as if it were taken straight from the sociopath's instruction manual. As a work of fiction, Imperial Dishes was enormously entertaining, but as an actual working cookbook, I felt that it left a few too many holes. A homosexual's notion of bite-sized penis is no doubt dramatically different than that of, say, an Orthodox rabbi. It's just not specific enough. When told to, quote, arrange the camel paw attractively, my first question was, how? Camel paws don't even look attractive on camels. On top of that, where are you supposed to buy these ingredients in the first place? If you can't locate a single camel paw, can you use 24 cat paws instead? Well, one can easily find the ingredients for a pipe bomb, it isn't all that easy to get your hands on a disembodied penis. And what's an acceptable substitute for a vagina? I'd really like to know, as my brother would pay handsomely for that information. The questions are frustrating, but all in all, that's what I liked about Imperial Dishes of China. It made me think. If anybody has any questions, I would be happy to answer them. I arrived here 2 weeks ago, and I arrived in New York, and I'm going to be going on a tour. I'm going to, I think, 23 cities or something, and this was the first place. I mean, I don't leave until the 27th. I go back to New York, and then I go out on the 27th. But yeah. So this was, I hadn't read out loud in a while, and I woke up. Today's Monday. I woke up Sunday morning at 7 o'clock, and that was the last time I went to sleep. So the words were like swimming around on the page, and I thought, wow, that's good. I've read these enough times to memorize them. Yes?
You write a lot about your relationship with Hugh, your family, and it's so wickedly clever. I'm wondering how much you draw from reality, how much is something real that happens that just gets an idea started. If you could talk about where...
The question was, how much do I lie?
Exactly.
Let's see. In the story about Hugh and I on the train, my instinct was to lie and make up, of course, the perfect thing everyone wishes they'd said, but I didn't, because I didn't want those people who I hated to ever come to me and call me a liar. So I did not exaggerate at all in that story. And the story about Hugh and I going to the movies, I didn't exaggerate at all there. He's a little bit tricky about being written about. I usually have to do it behind his back and then give it to him later. And I mean, there's lots of things that I would never write about him. But he's not, I always thought that everyone was like my family, and that there's no, even negative attention is good. That all you want is attention all the time. And I always just assumed everybody was like that, and he's not. And it bothered him when the book came out and people came up and would ask him questions about growing up in Africa, or ask him questions about his mom. That kind of got on his nerves. So I have to really kind of pick and be a little bit careful when I'm writing about him. And A story about my brother. I can't really think of anything there that's not true. Um, yeah, I can't really think of anything there. In the last book, I really tried not to exaggerate that much. I thought, okay, that's my natural inclination is to do that. So I just tried to not do it and sort of hope that the stories worked as stories anyway. It's a little bit difficult when you're writing about your own life. I mean, if you have an exciting, dramatic life, then it's great. But my life is not. My life is not inherently dramatic. So I need to beef things up a little bit normally. Yes?
Question and sort of a comment. I've seen you speak a couple of times, and I've noticed the audience is really an interesting mix of people. And I would have expected there to be a lot more like gay men in your audience. And I wonder what you think about that, like what your relationship to the gay male community is in some ways.
You know, I've been really, really incredibly lucky in that being on the radio, being stuck on the radio. I don't mean stuck on the radio like I'm stuck on the radio and I can't get off, but I mean being put on the radio gave me access to a radio audience, and I think NPR's demographic is something that people would die to get their hands on. And so I'm always surprised when I go out, like there'll be like a 70-year-old next to a 16-year-old next to, you know, uh, I don't know, uh, a couple of homos next to, a couple of black people next to. I mean, it's sort of. I think it's a radio audience, and I've never. It's interesting. Like sometimes publishers want to sell you. Like my book just came out in England. And in England, if you've ever had a penis in your mouth, then you have to have pink on your book cover. You know, and it doesn't matter what you're writing about. Like if you've had a penis in your mouth and you're writing about surgical techniques, then they got to put pink on your cover. And what happens then is then they put pink on your cover and they say, okay, we'll sell you to homosexuals. Even if you're not writing about that, those are the only people who would be interested in you. And then you're not writing about having a penis in your mouth today, so then you go to the gay bookstore and people are like, what's he doing here? So it's odd. I mean, that's an odd thing about anyone having a book, is because you write your book and you just write a book because you want to write a book, and then it's somebody's job to sell that book and somebody's job to decide, regardless of what you say, who your audience is or who your audience should be. And that's been a really great thing about being on the radio, is that I don't let them dictate that. And I don't know, to me the audience, like if I said, oh, I wish there were more blank in the audience, I can't really, more potheads maybe. But other than that, I've just been really, really lucky. I think that it's just a big mix of everybody, which I always thought that was unfair growing up. Growing up in North Carolina, because it wasn't like you could go to the library and you could find a book about two guys who were in love in that time in Raleigh, North Carolina. You just couldn't. So you just read a book about two people who were in love, and you just pretend that Sarah was someone named Brad. But you thought, okay, well, love is love, and so look at this as like a love story, and it's about love, and we can twist the figures in a way. So it was never kind of a thing where, like if you were homosexual, then you thought, oh, well, that's not for me. I'm not going to go see that movie because that's a straight couple. And so it never quite seemed fair to me that then straight people would feel the same way and think, oh, well, no, that's not for me. He has a boyfriend. I don't want to hear about that. But I haven't found that to be the case. I really haven't. When I think about the complaints from NPR and stuff, they're like minuscule. They're like, nothing. Yes?
Kind of along the same lines,
No. Was there any fear about mentioning my boyfriend or whatever at Esquire? No, I really love my editor at Esquire, and he doesn't. It's never, ever, ever. The only thing they ever asked me to change was I said some really horrible things about Bruce Willis, who normally I don't. Like I think there was a time when I thought, oh, you can say whatever you want about movie stars; they'll never see it, but they do, and they're just regular people, and people put magazines in their hands. But Bruce Willis, I have a vendetta against anyone who has partial ownership in Planet Hollywood. It's a vendetta. And so I'd written this stuff about Bruce Willis in one of my movie reviews, and they said, well, we're putting him on the cover. Can you change that? So instead of calling him, I don't know, I'd called him that hamburger salesman. But I understood from their point of view. They'd arranged for him to be on the cover. He's going to be on the cover, and then he opens it, and then there's some guy saying bad things about him. So I understand that. That's the only thing they've ever asked me to change. It's never been, ever been an issue with them whatsoever. Yes?
You mentioned your sisters, Lisa and Amy. What are your other two sisters doing?
I have a sister named Tiffany who lives in Boston, and she is a baker. And then I have a sister, let's see, Gretchen, who works with plants, and a sister Lisa who works with plants, and then my sister Amy, who's an actress. Is that four?
Yeah.
Yeah, and my brother Paul has a floor sanding business. Yes?
At what point did you realize that you wanted to write for a living and that you were actually good at it?
When did I realize I wanted to write for a living? I was 27. And I started writing maybe when I was 20, and I just kept it to myself. And then I read a lot. And then one day, when I was 27, I was riding my bike home from the grocery store, and I announced to myself, like the same way that Scarlett announced that she would never be hungry again, I announced to myself out loud that I wanted to do that. And it really made all the difference in the world, just saying it out loud to myself. I mean, I didn't go around telling people, but for some reason, I just remember riding my bike that day and the hill and the whole thing, and it just seemed to have meaning when I told myself that. Then I thought, okay, now I have a goal. Either I make the goal and I wind up being an incredibly obnoxious person, or I don't make the goal and I wind up being an incredibly obnoxious person, Yes?
Coming from the north and the south and living in Paris, where do you identify the most with?
Well, I grew up in New York State where we lived. It's just a cloverleaf, basically, at this point. It's not like we have any people who live there, any relatives anymore. And in Raleigh, I don't know, I don't never learn to drive a car, so when I go to Raleigh, I'm just kind of stuck in my dad's basement. I think of New York as home, but I don't really. I've been there for the last few weeks. I don't feel like it's great to be back or anything. I don't mean to say. If I had to live anywhere, if I had to leave France right now, I would move to New York, and I would think of that as home. But I really like being a foreigner. It really agrees with me. It's nothing to do with France, and I'm not a Francophile. Like a gushy Francophile. It's just pretty and, good health care. And, you can smoke wherever you want, and that's enough for me. You can get the New York Times crossword puzzle. That's it as far as I'm concerned. Yes?
I was wondering if anyone had ever approached you about putting a screenplay together, and if they did, would that be something that you would be interested in? You seem like you would have a really good flair for creating something.
The question was about movies. I've been asked several times in the past, but most of the times I never understood what someone was saying to me. It was like they were talking about air. It was like the exchange of ideas, and they never really did anything. They never talked about money, and they would never have to do anything, but I would have to do an awful lot of work to make them happy, and I didn't like them. So it was never a consideration with me. And then I met somebody recently who I like, who wants to make a movie out of this book, and I didn't really want to get involved in it. I just thought, okay, if you want to give me the money, then fine, but I'm not going to get involved in it. And now that it's progressing, I look at it and I realize that, someone else wrote the screenplay, but my family is not in my control anymore. Somebody else is doing it, and they're doing it all wrong. Like, I know how my brother talks, and my brother didn't use that word. And my brother, so now I'm thinking I might rewrite this thing just because I feel like I kind of owe it to my family. I mean, just to, I think it was really wrong of me to agree to do it in the first place. If it was a fictional story, then that would have been different. So what I'm trying to do now, actually, is just to try to talk this guy into just making the whole movie about a midget guitar teacher and a 12-year-old. And then just the two of them, roommate situation or something, but just depart from the book and just go. Because you can't go wrong with them. That's a winning combination. Yes?
Is it difficult when writing a play to then go and have to deal with the director about, specifically in the humor section, what's funny, what's not funny, how it's to be brought out by the actors? Or do you just write it and give it to them and leave it alone?
Well, we did our first play. We've never done a play in New York. We've never done a play without Hugh. And he always designed the sets. And he's directing. He directed our last show at Lincoln Center, and he's directing this show. So when he's a director, then I feel fine, absolutely fine. I mean, our senses of humor are different, but I can talk to him. Like, we had directors in the past, and I would say, why do I have to cut 10 minutes out so then you can have this 10-minute scene where people are just staring at each other and not saying a word? Just asking. And I can't really, I just needed somebody who I could talk to. And I really trust Hugh that way. So it works out. That tends to work out pretty well. If it was another director, I think I would just back down and just say, okay, whatever you want to do. And I can never, ever direct myself. Never, ever, 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 ever. I cannot tell people what to do. And the thing to do if you're a director is to get people to do exactly what you want them to do, but make them feel like it's their idea. And it's not a skill that I necessarily have. So, and I guess the experience of doing the play is just different because it's not solitary. I mean, writing a book is just solitary. And working on the play, you're working with other people, and I don't ever want to close myself off to their suggestions, because the people we work with are really the funniest people in the world, and they come up with funnier stuff without even trying. So I want to exploit that, and I want to take those lines and act as though they were my own, and put them into the... So it's very collaborative. But somebody's got to be in charge. Someone's got to say, I'm going to take this, and I'm not going to take that. I mean, in terms of lines, or you can improvise here, but not there. It usually works out pretty well. It's a pretty good mix. Yes?
Do you have any interest in writing political commentary or satire?
Political commentary? No, not really. I don't, I never read that part of the paper. I get the International Herald Tribune for the puzzle. I felt really relieved not to I was in the country when the election went on, and I voted. I had an absentee ballot, so I did vote. But no, I mean, not politics that way per se. A different kind, like just politics, like he's an asshole. You know what I mean? Get him, but just more personal. Just, yeah. One more question?
Yeah. Back to the line thing. Every time they introduce you on NPR, they say, as David Sedaris, he cleans apartments in New York. Where did that come from?
I had a job. I was when I first started on the radio, I was cleaning apartments in New York. That was my job, and they give everyone a little tagline, second grade teacher in Georgia, and that's the only thing that my father really pissed. Why do they have to say that? My friends are listening to it. They know you're cleaning goddamn apartments, which is what I was doing, and it was my job, and it was a good job for me because I don't have that many skills, and it paid well. But then it kind of ruined my job in a way too. And then I got all these calls, and people would, like people who listen to the radio a little too much would call, and normally I'd go to someone's house, it's empty. I get paid for 3 hours. I'm out of there in 2. Go in, go through everything they own, get out. And this way you'd go, and they'd be there like this. And here's a story you might want to use for the radio. And all of a sudden, it had been my job, but all of a sudden it felt like a gimmick. And it wasn't a gimmick, it was just my job. But it just sort of ruined it in a way. And I'd like to, I don't have working papers now in France. But I'd like to find a volunteer job there. Just something, and again, even if I did have working papers, I don't have any skills really. So it would have to be, I might as well, wipe someone's ass or, you know what I mean? I don't care. It's just an opportunity to get out of the house and to improve my vocabulary skills.
One last question. Has your father responded to all the success of writing and books and stuff?
Oh, he's fine. We get along good. I make money and I give it to him, and that's what makes him happy. And then he does stuff with it, and then I see in the paper that it's like gone. You know what I mean? That it's, but so he figures it's like teamwork, and so it works. I think it's his punishment. I think it's how he's punishing me for it. But no, he's a great sport. He really is. I really can't complain. I make horrible fun of him. I imitate him in front of large numbers of people, and he doesn't care. Which is great. I would have rather had him than like one of those kind of caring like 90s dads who, because then what are you going to write about? I guess if anyone would like a book signed or whatever, I'll be available for that. Thank you very, very much for having me here tonight. I appreciate it.
David Sedaris.